live.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. You're with Sarisa Richardson, and I am a women's business coach at the Wise Women's Business Center. And joined with me today is Alexandra Kostakis, and she is actually an entrepreneur herself and also a professor. And we'll be talking about bootstrapping your business, a very common topic. If this is the first time that you've ever had the joy of joining our Power Hours here at the Wise Women's Business Center, welcome. Wise is an exciting resource for women in women entrepreneurs at all stages of your business development. We provide expertise and year-round support to business owners, helping them achieve your business goals. So one of the ways that we do that is through our live power hours. And then another way is through our one-on-one business coaching, for which I am one of the coaches, but we have two others. So a total of 3 business coaches, which I highly encourage you to reach out to our center to get connected with so many resources to provide. So with all of that said, why don't we jump right into our topic and welcome Alexandra.
Hello, everyone. Oh, this is just very weird. How's everyone out there?
We're having virtual rounds of applause, Alexandra. So we'll pause for those.
It's weird because I'm not getting any feedback. All I see is like a black screen. So welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be here. As Sarisa said, I'm an entrepreneur. I've started several businesses in my life so far. But I also have the opportunity to teach at Syracuse University. So I'm actually a professor of entrepreneurship there. And I teach every semester, a new venture finance class. So how to finance your business through the stages. And I always tell my students that if there was a PhD in bootstrapping, I would have it because I'm like a master bootstrapper. So I'm here to share
I'm so happy to hear
my knowledge. Yes.
Awesome. Well, we've got the master, the expert here. For all of you who are watching on Facebook, as well as joining us on the Zoom, please feel free to engage, ask questions. We will certainly try to answer them throughout the entire session. We want this to be a very dynamic back and forth conversation. Like Alexandra said, she's used to being in front of a large audience. So we'll try not to call on you, but we do want you to engage with the conversation. So Alexandra, why don't we start with a definition of bootstrapping? Because I don't know that. I don't want to assume that all business owners know what that even means.
Yeah, so bootstrapping is basically getting your business up and running by using the least amount of resources as possible. And a lot of times when people think of resources, one of those, the big one is money. But you got to think about what other kinds of resources your business needs. It needs people. You're never going to have enough help. Definitely the money, time, maybe plant, property, and equipment. So all of these are these kinds of resources that you just get your business up and running with. The other thing is it's what we call all internal funding. So when you're bootstrapping, you're not like getting funding from other people. It's like you're just doing it all on your own. And then hopefully your business gets to a point where you can use retained earnings or the money that your business is generating to get in. And the other thing I like to tell my students is that bootstrapping is really the purest form of entrepreneurship, right? I mean, as entrepreneurs, whatever we started the business, we're basically solving a problem out there in the marketplace or in the business environment. Well, our problem is we don't have enough money. So we're solving that problem through being very, very creative. All right. And the other thing I wanted to share is that, it's not just for small businesses. Bootstrapping is a skill that, everyone pretty much needs and has done. Even businesses that that are really, really successful now, they've all used some form of bootstrapping at one point in time or another.
Thanks for that brief definition, because I know we could have even dived deep a little bit more on some of the just the definition points, right? I'd love to talk about, so for me, when I think about how an entrepreneur has to finance their business, right? There's sort of two stages that I always think about, and that's the startup stage, right at the beginning, and then the growth stage. So maybe you've been in business a little while, things are a little stale, and you're thinking about new services or products or areas or ventures to go into in order to expand your business, um, your base. And then in terms of COVID, we've had a lot of business owners pivoting and expanding in new ways. So why don't we talk a little bit about financing those different stages? Because like you said, when it comes to bootstrapping or resources, as an entrepreneur, we tend to always think about the big one being money, and then we can talk about the others as well.
Oh, so the question is, what do we do in the growth stage?
Let's start at the startup stage.
Oh, the startup stage.
And I'm happy to, why don't we use you as an example? You mentioned you started a couple of businesses yourself, if you're willing to share. But what are some tips that you'd love to share for someone who's in that startup stage? What are some ways that you think that they can bootstrap their startup?
Yeah. Okay. So with bootstrapping, there's two major categories. So even though a lot of entrepreneurs do bootstrapping, there's not a lot of research that has been done on bootstrapping. But you can think about bootstrapping in two very high level categories. One is efficiently using resources, and the other one is gaining resources. So efficiently using resources is things that you have, that you own or that you might have around you that you can use to get your business up and running. Okay, and I'll give an example of that. The other is gaining control of resources. So these are types of resources that we don't own or we don't have, ourselves, but we have to go outside to sort of get them. So one of the businesses that my husband and I started it's a high performance driving school here in central New York. So basically, without getting into the details of why we're in this, but basically we teach you how to drive your high performance vehicle at the limit. Okay.
That sounds so fun.
It's totally fun. I mean, it's exhilarating. Anyway, my husband is like a retired race car driver, but anyway.
How cool.
Yeah, it's fun. But I always tell this story to all my students, because when you hear that, again, in class, I would cold call on students, but I'm not going to do that here. But think about in your heads what it would take to get this business running, like the top 5 costs, right? It's the name of the company is European Driving Academy, and we're teaching you how to drive high performance vehicles. All right. So just from teaching students, they'll always say, well, you need cars. Yes, you do. You need somewhere to do this. Yes, you need a track. This sounds dangerous. You're going to need insurance, right? What else? Hey, let's just start with those top 3. Oh, people to give the courses, right? So then I'm like, all right, add that up in your head and tell me how much you think it costs to start this business. And they'll say, 500,000, 3 million. And, those are all legitimate answers. But then I'll tell them, hey, we started this business with $500. And they'll be like, well, how did you do that? And a lot of people, they think when you start a business, you go right to like, boom. They fail to see the little steps that you go in between. But basically what I tell them is like, say, I spent $500. Well, let's say 700. First, I incorporated the business, so I had to spend some money there. And then I just set up a website, right? And bootstrapping is basically every single expenditure that you need to make, you just try to minimize it as much as possible. So even when you're building a website, do all the work yourself, do all the outlines and hire somebody. I mean, we hired someone out in India to do it, right? Because it was a lot cheaper than hiring someone within the States, unfortunately. But from that, we were able to get our first customer. I didn't need anything else. I just had to get my first customer. And the customer, basically said, okay, I want to hire you guys to, do whatever you got to do. And I was able to get the first customer. So my next problem was, how am I going to do this? Because I don't have any other resources, right? So remember, I was talking about efficiently using your resources. Well, that first lesson that we did, I had to put my own asset on the line, and you probably can all figure out what that was. I had to put my car on there. So I've got this little sports car, this little BMW. But I had to put that in the business so that I could do our first lesson. And that's an example of bootstrapping. I didn't go out there and buy fancy cars. I didn't even have a track. And as a matter of fact, I hate to say this on Facebook Live, but the first day of this lesson, we just did on the regular roads. All right. And I'm not going to tell you what we taught this gentleman, but it was out there, the resource of the roads. We just had to find something that was a little remote, and it worked out. And we were able to do our first lesson, get money in the company, and then grow from there. So that's just one example.
I think that's a great example especially for service-based businesses that might have lower costs to start up. There are other examples that I'm sure we've heard. Restaurant businesses, which typically take a significant amount of capital to start up. One of our last participants who was in the restaurant business even mentioned self-financing using savings, and then also just your 9-to-5. If you think of that as a self-financing and using that to pay for initial equipment, and then using that initial equipment to get some initial order fulfillment done, so creating what, if you're like in the restaurant business or a baker, maybe you create a small inventory of baked goods, you sell those, and you use that capital to finance another piece of equipment or something. So that's another example of how someone could finance a really a higher cost business. Alexandra, we did actually get some questions that came in while you were talking. So why don't we go through those? So, okay, one question: what are some of the most creative ways you've seen people bootstrap? I just found out about fractional CFOs or other roles and think that's so interesting. I agree with this person. Have you heard of this, Alexandra, a fractional CFO?
I have not, but I'm thinking that it's probably like fractional jet ownership, where you don't own the whole like you just pay the CEO for part, like a subcontractor, something like that.
I've never heard of this term. So whoever asked that question, if you are on Zoom, feel free to jump in, or if you're on Facebook, feel free to summarize a little bit. But what I do hear in this question is a creative way of using the personnel as a resource. So one way is bringing in people as owners, or having like a piece of ownership of your company if they want to be a resource. So CFOs, CEOs, because just because you're a founder doesn't mean you have to be the CEO of your business, or even CMOs, chief marketing officers. If that's not a competency you personally hold, you could certainly bring in someone as a fractional partner. So someone who may not have a controlling interest in the company. So they may have, and you can do this without being like a C Corp or a shares-based business. You could even do this as an LLC and just give them a piece of the ownership of the business so that you're not a sole owner. So that's a great way to use resources. Another creative way is I'd love to share is how I started my business, So a big part of the fashion industry is having models and photographers and things like that. I do a lot of trade with my business. So that's another way that you can utilize resources without giving up a ton of cash. If you are a cash strapped business, that carries a lot of inventory. So those are some creative ways. I hope that was helpful. Alexandra, I'm open to you sharing others that I may not have mentioned.
So one of the other businesses that I have with my mom, and we've been doing this for like over 20 years, is we are an inventory-based business. And at the very beginning, before the web was around, and I hate to say that because it sort of dates me, there were catalogs that we had to have. Like Sarisa said, we didn't have the money to do like a professional catalog. So one of the things that bootstrapping does is helps you unlock your hidden talents that you didn't know, that unless you're backed up against the wall, you don't really access. So, I had to learn Photoshop and Illustrator. I had a friend of mine who was like a desktop publishing person, and she helped me out. I sort of didn't buy the full version of Photoshop, if everyone knows what I mean. It was way back when, part of bootstrapping. I loved photography, so I rented a really high-end camera. Again, you're not purchasing the high-end camera, you're renting it, sort of like fractional ownership. Who did I use for models? I had abundance of those. My family, right? I used my kids, I used myself, I used my husband, I even used my dog. And I, put in all the effort to create this catalog, and it was like several pages long, full color, that I was really proud of in the end. It actually looked good, but I learned a lot of these skills, and that's another thing that bootstrapping does. Because it's, basically it's keeping as much cash as you can within the business without spending it. And there are a lot of stories out there of, I'm going to just share a story with Zappos. I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with Zappos, right? Well, Tony Hsieh, the way he started, he didn't go out and buy a ton of shoes and spend money on inventory. But you know what he did? He just basically got a friend of his, created a website, okay? Well, where did he get the shoes, you might ask? Well, he went to the mall with a camera and took pictures of all the shoes and threw them on his website. No inventory. Well, what did he do? People would go on the website, they would buy the shoes, he would get the sale, he would then go to the mall, purchase the shoes, and ship them to them, all right? So that was a way to avoid having any inventory. It sort of proved to him that, hey, there is a market for this, and then the business started generating money. He probably went to a couple of his friends and said, hey, you want to throw in on this? It's really working. And boom, we have got Zappos, who was acquired for what, millions of dollars by Amazon. So, just an example.
No, it's a great example. I love the success stories, but we do have an interesting question that I'm really excited to share from our program manager, Kim. So I'm also interested in the downsides of bootstrapping. It's very romanticized, but it is not always the best approach if you do actually have the ability to access capital in other ways. So I think that this is an excellent time to talk about, when is it appropriate to actually pause in your business and acquire the capital that's required to grow or start up? In what ways would you suggest someone do that, like in order to evaluate when it's a good time to do that? It's a really good question, because I think, many of the success stories with bootstrapping typically are low cost, very low barrier to entry businesses. So online web-based businesses, no inventory businesses that don't require capital equipment and things like that. Those businesses, tend to be, you hear a lot of success stories around that. Larger businesses, so say if you want to do like real estate development, or again, opening a restaurant. So those type of businesses, when you are thinking of starting them, if you have the capital, it may not be a good idea to go the bootstrapping way. What do you think about that, Alexandra?
So I would agree. So if you have, obviously, the beauty of entrepreneurship is it's different for everyone. Everyone comes from different situations. So yeah, the more money that you have, obviously the more money you can put into your business. And usually the more money you have, the more access to additional money that you can get. So another thing that I tell my students is that, sometimes having too much money makes you stupid. I don't know if anyone else agrees with this. And I share another story with them, and I hope I don't go off on a tangent here, Sarisa. But in the mid 90s, I started another company in New York with a partner of mine. And for that business, we actually had an angel investor. All right. So we're talking two, recent college graduates in the city, and we have $100,000 from an angel investor. And at the beginning, we were very, very disciplined with spending the money. We were very careful not to waste it as we tried to build the business. Well, early on, we weren't able to get any customers. We were building websites, and the web was really, really new at that time. And all we kept hearing for customers were, "Oh, not sure the web is going to be the way of the future, too risky, blah, blah, blah." So we then convinced ourselves, or my partner did, I would never do this, of course, that the reason we weren't getting any sales was we needed a better computer. And that better computer cost $17,000. And so we went back and forth with my partner, and we're like, yeah, if we get this computer, it's totally going to make our business excellent. Well, we went down
a really nice computer.
Yeah, it was a high-end silicon graphics machine, 3D render. It was very high-end. It was a workstation basically in the 90s. Basically could be a server, could run a server farm anyway. So we buy the computer, and now we go back to the office, and we're like, yeah, now our business is going to be awesome. Well, 1 week goes by, 2, 4 weeks, no customers. And I see John, my partner, never working on this machine. Finally, I get up the nerve to ask him why he's not using it. And he goes, Alex, I don't know Unix. And I'm like, excuse me? He goes, I don't know Unix. And Unix is the programming language you needed to run this scientific computer. And I was just like, you're kidding me, right? He's like, no. And so it sat there, $17,000 worth of our money on the thing. Cause he's like, you can learn how to drive a plane or fly a plane with it, Alex. I'm like, really? So, sometimes having too much money makes you believe that things are wrong with your business that really are not. Okay. So it hides or puts a cushion on really what the issues are. Okay. But that aside, I do bootstrap businesses don't grow as fast as properly financed businesses. But at the same time, and I can tell you stories of Airbnb, Sam Adams, Lululemon that I've used in class of examples of bootstrapping where they use bootstrapping to a point and then they switch to getting additional financing to scale. So I believe the answer to Sarisa's question is that you actually move to that next level when you've gained market traction, and you know that in order to become more competitive, offer more value to your customers, and to grow in a very strategic way, you need a lot more money than bootstrapping can get you. Okay.
And I think that's so great.
Yeah. And the best type of financing for that would be going to the bank, a commercial loan, especially when you've got a track record. It's going to be the cheapest way to fund it rather than going I'm giving you part of my company type of route.
So, let's stay there a little bit. So I'm just going to unpack a little of what you said, because I think Kim's point is just so valid. And I really want to make sure everyone's like soaking in it and then marinating in the goodness of this topic. I have always seen, and even the way I initiated my business, right? There's always, when you think of starting a business, you're in your startup stage, you're still in a bit of a proof of concept phase. So you're still testing things. You're still, clarifying your business model, clarifying who your customer is, blah, 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 right? In that startup phase. And that's one of the reasons why most commercial lenders do not like to lend to startups, right? And another reason why it's typically a lot more difficult to get private investors to invest in startups, because you're still in a proof of concept. So one of the ways that you can, in the early phase, right, use bootstrapping, right, to just test your concept, right, in that startup phase or even pre-startup, test your concept. And that's what bootstrapping, that financial method could help do. But like Alexandra said, now that you've done your proof of concept and you're really solid in the business that you plan to grow and scale, one of the dangers of bootstrapping is you can't really, like Alexandra said, grow as fast. You can't really compete with other competitors in your market space if you are not properly financed. So you will, at some point, in order to grow and scale your business, you will have to look for alternative ways to finance your business. So to Kim's point, if you do have the access to capital at the startup phase of your business, I always like to challenge that entrepreneur with making sure you use that capital wisely. So have a plan for how you are going to use it. Have a plan for your return on investment, and have a plan for when after your startup, right, after your proof of concept phase that you've just invested in, have a plan for the growth. You know, what is your growth plan after you've spent whatever your initial capital is to start up your business? And how are you going to finance your growth plan? So that's sort of my 2 cents in there. So, Alexandra, I think this is a great time actually to talk a little bit about return on investment, because I think, you know, one thing that is when I coach business owners, and again, if you're just joining us on Facebook or on Zoom, I'm with Alexandra Kostakis. Am I saying your last name right?
Perfectly, Sarisa. I actually like the end where you're like Kostakis. That's very Greek. So perfect.
Awesome.
Excellent.
So I'm with Alexandra Kostakis, and she and I are talking about bootstrapping your business. And again, I'm with the Wise Women's Business Center here based in Syracuse, and we have tons of resources for women entrepreneurs. So in our conversation, talking about bootstrapping, I think it's really important that we talk about, as an entrepreneur, how do we measure the return on investment? Alexandra, what tips do you have there?
Okay, so the one thing I see with small businesses and entrepreneurs is they're really afraid of the numbers. All right, and research shows that this is a thing, which is weird because an entrepreneur is being all about business, and business is basically numbers, right? So you have to understand your numbers. So the first step in this growth and return on investment is actually figuring out what your costs are, right? So what do I actually need to grow my business, right? So what are those costs? Is it plant, property, and equipment? Is it employees? What are these costs? And at the beginning of a business, we call these startup costs. But when your business is operational, every time you need to scale, I mean, companies are doing this all the time. They put together these budgets. Like, what do we need? What's our budget? What kind of money do we need to go after this growth strategy that we have? And maybe you have several different ways to grow. So you have some options. And I see this all the time with businesses in regards to ways that they can grow. Well, the way you decide is okay, strategy 1, this is what the costs are going to be. Then you have to do what we call forecasting to say, okay, based on this is what our revenues are going to be, what our fixed costs are going to be. And then at the end of the day, what our net income is going to be, right? And then you basically, you take those startup costs, or that the budget that you put together, of the initial investment you have to make, you divide it by that net income, and it'll let you know, how many years it takes you to get back that return on investment. And if you have several options, you can compare them to say, hey, this is the one I think is more worthwhile for me.
Alexandra, so I love that example, because it's really analytical way and absolutely necessary way for evaluating, how to move through your business, right? I feel like another sort of return on investment metric that people always forget to measure are those qualitative metrics, right? So some investments, you're not going to see a quick financial dollar amount return. So what tips do you have? And I'm actually going to stop talking in hypotheticals. Here's an example, right? Marketing. So in order to compete, especially with larger existing businesses that are in people's face all the time, depending on the type of industry and business you're in, you may have to invest in some marketing dollars, right? And it's really difficult when you invest in marketing for your business. It's hard to measure the return in terms of number of dollars and like sales or services and things like that. You may get the return in other ways, being brand recognition, market penetration, and things like that. Alexandra, do you have tips on how someone can sort of value that when they're evaluating how much to spend on these things that may not have a financial return right away?
Yeah,
That's
that's
hard.
really hard to gauge because as Sarisa was talking, I'm like, yeah, brand value is good, but that don't pay the bills, right? I
Right.
mean, the qualitative stuff is good, and you're right. When you're building a brand takes a lot of time and a lot of money to build. And you're going to see those returns much later than you probably expect, even though we're probably going to want, immediate returns. That's just not going to happen. How do you measure that? To be honest with you, I'm trying to think of my business.
So to not put you on the spot, since I have a product-based business, I'll give folks an example of how I do it. So for something like that, I know is not going to see a revenue return. I don't like to invest a lot of upfront money on that. I like to do that backwards. So it's a percent of my revenue. So a percent of your earnings, you are going to say, how much of that net income do you want to reinvest in the business? And you almost think of it like it's like gambling, right? When I invest in the stock market or when I gamble, right? That's like disposable income. I would like to get it back, but I'm preparing to never see those dollars again. So the best way to tailor yourself and make sure you're not overspending, over allocating in those areas is to, like Alexandra said, know your numbers, right? So you're going to know the cost of your business. You're going to know the expenses and the income. And then at the end of the year, you're going to have your net income. And you're going to say a percent of my net every month or at the end of the year or every quarter. That's all that I'm going to invest in these qualitative type growth metrics. And definitely measure the qualitative growth, have goals set for them so that you're not overspending and over allocating.
So to add to
I agree, doggy.
Oh my gosh, yeah, he is totally, I apologize. So adding to what Sarisa said, the gamble that she's talking about in academic terms is actually called affordable loss. So affordable loss is also one of those sort of characteristics of bootstrapping, but it's in entrepreneurship as a whole, where anything that you invest, you have to be willing to lose because it might work and it might not. So never go above what you're not willing to lose, or what we call that affordable loss. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, another good metric for these like qualitative types of things is sort of like this: what is your cost to acquire a customer, which is like another sort of metric that you should understand in your business. How much marketing dollars do you have to spend to get one? And so once you start doing this, you can actually, look and say, okay, I spent, $500 on this Facebook ad. What was my return on that? How many customers did I get? And then you can have sort of like okay, this is what the cost to acquire a customer is. And you can sort of keep that, and sort of you can gauge it as you continue. to see, is that going down? Is it getting better? Is my marketing becoming more effective? And it's another way to sort of capture that qualitative thing. And again, it might take a little time, but it's another way to sort of tell yourself, yeah, I'm doing a good job, or I'm not.
Thanks for that, Alexandra. I want to actually return a bit to the comment about fractional CFOs. So we did get a little bit of expansion on that. So yes, it's where you get a part-time CFO or other role, and you only pay a part of their salary. Sometimes people in incubators will split that person. Awesome. And thanks for whoever provided that explanation. I would like to return back to the resources associated with running a business and how you can bootstrap those resources. And would love to talk a little bit about incubators for those who are on the call and may not know what that is. So Alexandra, what do you know about incubators, and what sort of benefits would they have to certain entrepreneurs?
So incubators are basically shared resource spaces where entrepreneurs can go. You have office space, you can share things like computers, printers, and some incubators, it depends on which ones, will actually have people coming in, so you can share professionals such as attorneys, accountants, marketing people, like some people, they will donate their time, others get paid, but it's a great place where you can share a lot of different resources with existing businesses.
And I think incubators are excellent for startup businesses because, like you said, it's a great way to share, but it's also a really great way to have a captive audience to test some of your ideas and get captive feedback on your ideas, which is really necessary as a startup business because should always be iterating, right? In order to, you release a piece of your business, you iterate on it, and you get feedback, and then you grow and re-release it, right? That's how we work in entrepreneurship, and incubators are a great way to sort of get more ideas, circulate those ideas, test out ideas, get immediate feedback. And then if you're a part of an incubator that has personnel resources that you can share, it's an awesome way to bootstrap your business because you can utilize those highly skilled resources at a very low cost. Great point.
In addition to that, it gives you like support too, right? Because these are other fellow entrepreneurs. They're going through the same things that you are. So, it's always nice to talk to somebody who's in the same situation as you.
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit about, so staying on bootstrapping your business and on the personnel side. I'd love to talk about employees. So as an entrepreneur, it's always really hard to bite the bullet and start hiring people for your business, right? Like we may never pay ourselves for like 5 years, right? But then when we hire people, it's like, oh, I gotta like actually pay these folks, right? So that's hard, right?
It is hard.
Especially, in a cash-strapped time like COVID. So what are some ways, Alexandra, or tips that you would share for the people that are entrepreneurs that are in maybe the startup or even growth phase of their business that need to evaluate bringing on an employee or two?
And they have the money to do it, or they don't have the money to do it?
So they don't have the money, right? Or they, let's start with they don't have the money. Let's start there.
All right.
She goes, oh God.
That's tough. But again, bootstrapping is all about being creative. So I guess the obvious answer might be, oh, well, let's give them a piece of the business. Okay. But that's not really liquid, is it? Giving them a piece of the business. But I guess you have to define what is a piece of the business. So one way you could do it is maybe create some kind of profit sharing. Okay. So if you don't have the money to pay them, maybe one deal you could strike up is say, hey, I'm willing to pay you an X amount of sales, right? And, for so long, depending. So it's sort of, think about it as a commission, even though it's not, but they're getting paid from your sales, which is also probably a great way to incentivize them, right? So the more sales, but you might want to cap it. You probably don't want it to be unlimited because it's going to take from your bottom line. You could also, instead of doing it a percentage of sales, a percentage of profits. I mean, that's probably a better metric for an entrepreneur, right? Because it's like you take away all the operating expenses and it's what's left from the bottom line, not the top line, that you do it. Because as an employee, they're going to want to get paid. And this is the other thing, the type of people you bring in, are they only there for a paycheck? Or do they believe in what you're doing and they want to support you and help the business grow? So I think you need to differentiate between the type of person, because that type of person who's really buying into what you're doing will probably be okay with foregoing a paycheck and maybe taking a percentage or getting paid less, but maybe the other person, they won't. So it's tough.
Yeah.
Tough.
And it's really tough when you are going through different cycles in your business. So in the startup phase, and we'll get to the growth, because I know I've been spending a lot of time on startup, because that's really, I think, the most difficult time to finance your business with external sources. But I could be wrong. What do you think, Alexandra?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
The startup stage is the most difficult stage to get external financing for your business.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The startup phase is the riskiest, right? So I know Sarisa mentioned this. No bank is going to give you financing because risk and bank financing do not go together. I mean, there is a way that you can get money for your startup from a bank, and you all know what this is going to entail, right? You got to put up your house, and it's a personal loan that you then put into the business, or you're personally guaranteeing. And that in itself is risky. So another reason why I'm always about bootstrapping. But maybe something we haven't talked about here is, one of the other very popular ways to sort of get money to start your business, and that's friends and family, right? So after you've exhausted your personal resources, and let's not forget, we can max out our credit cards too, right? I've been there, done that. And that's also the second most popular source of funding after owner savings is credit cards. Every single business has done it. It's risky, but we got to do what we got to do. But friends and family, you can ask your friends and family, for money. There's also crowdfunding, which is probably another power hour in itself. But, there's, friends and family. I've used that to bridge us, because sometimes you don't need that much money, maybe 10, 15, 20 grand. That's too little for a bank, right? So, maybe friends and family is the way to go.
And I always like to encourage. So whenever I have, one of my clients that I'm coaching, and they're all like, yeah, I might be able to ask some friends, I might be able to have some family, or I have no, right? Everyone's just as broke as I am. That's a very common conversation as well. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. Right. So before you go asking anyone for money, or before you go using your savings or maxing out credit cards, I always highly encourage, because so few of us actually do this. You'd be surprised, Alexandra, how many, you probably even know, so few entrepreneurs create actual plans for how they're going to use this money. So before you go asking people, before you go maxing out credit cards, before you go all of this stuff, putting your houses on, putting loans against your home to get capital, businesses are great ideas until they are not, right? So just, I always encourage, create an itemized, detailed plan for how you plan to use this money and how you plan to see that money return to you. Because it is a very sad thing that happens all the time, that entrepreneurs go into all of these ventures without plans for using this money. And then, like Alexandra, like you said, sometimes having access to too much money is not a good thing, because you're not as detailed in your planning, right? Because, I just know this is going to grow on my trees. I got, great uncle so and so who's going to give me whatever, right? But then you're not being as resourceful as you could be. You're not, using other resources that you probably have that you don't have to pay for, So it's really, really important as an entrepreneur. I cannot stress it enough to dig into those numbers. And I find, Alexandra, a lot of times the biggest challenge with entrepreneurs with getting so deep in the numbers is the creative entrepreneurs, right? Like, we all want to just be in that creative space and just like making pretty things and, stay in the marketing and all of that. But the numbers is how your business runs. So
yeah, it's like,
I'll hop off my soapbox.
No, and I'm with you, Sarisa, because like, the numbers, I basically call them the vital signs of your business. So when you go into the doctor, they take your temperature, they weigh you, your blood pressure, all those indicate whether you're healthy or not. Well, it's the same thing for a business. And Sarisa's correct. Before you do any of the friends and family, or even you put any money into your business, you do what, we call in academia, an economic model, which, is the numbers part of your plan. So again, it's what I was talking about before when we were talking about the growth of the business. What are the startup costs? Okay. What are my fixed costs? What am I selling? What are my revenue drivers? So how am I going to make money, right? What are my variable costs? So whatever I'm selling, what's the margin on that, right? And because you're listing all your costs and you're categorizing them as startup costs, fixed costs, and variable costs, you're then able to get to that magic number that we all need to know, which is our break even. And break even is not to be confused with return on investment, because the break even is operational. It's only when you are going to break even on operations, meaning the business is going to start making money. So your net income is positive. And all that requires some research. You got to do some, finding out your cost structure. You understand your market. And then once we got our economic model, we have to convert that to pro forma financials. So you don't do any of the stuff we're talking about today, even bootstrapping, without understanding your numbers. Mm-hmm. Hope I made that clear, Sarisa.
Absolutely. I'd love to touch on the break even a little bit before we head into self-financing in some creative ways. So for those of you on the call who have not yet done your break even analysis, I would highly encourage you to reach out to the Wise Women's Business Center and connect with one of us, your business coaches, who can help you with that. It is a very important stage of your business when you're in operations. You should know, especially if you have an actual physical location, how much it costs for you to stand in that space empty every day. You should literally have a daily break even. That's another exercise I personally work on with my coaching clients all the time. How much does it cost your business to just exist per day, right? Because that's the truth. As an entrepreneur, that is an existing thing, right? And then you set a goal based on margin and all of these other things Alexandra mentioned. What is your revenue goal per day? Right, in order to hit that. That's what that break-even number actually represents. So with covering that, Alexandra, let's talk a little bit about self-financing, because the number one way, obviously, most businesses get off the ground is owners investing in it themselves. So one creative way is, everyone's talking about the side hustle these days. So one creative way is having a full-time job and scaling your business back significantly to do it in a way that is on the quote unquote side of your full-time job. I actually like to flip the concept and think of my full-time job, that was my side hustle, right? And it was funding what is currently now finally my full-time job, right? So, I mean, I think that's also a way to think of self-financing. Do you have some other tips, Alexandra, you'd like to share on creative ways that entrepreneurs can self-finance their startups?
Self-finance. Well, that's like the number one way, right? So keep your day job, and then and that's what we did with the driving academy. Just pumped some money. We kept our day jobs, and it was like a weekend thing. Another way to self-finance. I mean, I know a colleague of mine used to call this like the come to Jesus moment, where sometimes you're going to have to make some sacrifices. So look around you. What can you sell to finance your business, right? Do you have, a boat sitting around, or maybe, any kind of asset, so what are you willing to sell to finance your business? I don't know if you have any investments you need to cash out of. I mean, even though I'd be wary to do that, but I know that people do that. I teach a lot of military personnel, and they always have money on the side, and it's crazy how they just liquidate all that to start their businesses. But I guess you got to believe in yourself. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on anything else. Self-funding. You could take out a personal loan and put that into your business. Or, that's another way to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I love the like the hustle that goes along with figuring out like what things do I have that I can sell, right? And that takes a whole nother piece of energy and things to acquire that capital. Another way is, how far back can you scale down your startup of your business to just get your proof of concept through? Because that's really all you need in your first 24 months of being a business owner before you can get a commercial loan, right? So can you scale it back enough? Like what type of things, right? What type of metrics do you need to prove that your business concept is a viable business so that you can convince an external financer to finance your business? So I am a huge, huge, huge fan of pop-ups. So pop-up models, it's a great way with low amounts of initial capital to earn some revenue that you can then reinvest in your business. You are not going to actually be making any money as a pop-up person. So just gonna be real there, right? So this is not about you earning some extra side cash, right? It's really about, using pop-ups as a model to prove your business concept, gain customers, gain brand awareness and all of that in a very small scaled back way, so that in a year or two, preferably, you can go to an external source and request the funding that you actually need to scale and grow and implement your business. So that's a great way to self-finance. I'm a huge fan of that. I'm just going to pause a second, Alexandra, and see if we have any questions from any of the folks that we have on the Zoom, because we've got about 5 minutes left in this discussion. All right, so I just assume that we're doing an excellent job. Alexandra, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, like the pop-up shop, that's an example of bootstrapping, right? So getting to market, bootstrapping can also be seen as getting to market by using as minimal resources as possible. So pop-up shops are a great idea. What Zappos did is an example of that. You can even use crowdfunding to prove your concept. So what Sarisa said that was important was, your goal is not to make money, but to generate awareness, to get people to tell you that, yeah, we like your concept, we're willing to buy. So there's a lot of companies that use the Kickstarter platform as a proof of concept. They don't even have a concept yet, but they create like a nice video, explainer video telling people what it is. And the pre-buys is what actually gives them the proof of concept. Another really smart way to use the crowdfunding is like, and you don't know what product is going to sell or what's the price level, you can actually adjust what you're selling. And it's a great way to just do like market research, and you can get money at the same time, especially if you meet your goal. But yeah, everything, understanding your minimal viable product or feasibility tests, all examples of bootstrapping.
Awesome. Well, Alexandra, I am going to genuinely just thank you so much for your time today. Carolyn, before I head out, if we have any questions that I didn't capture, please throw them in the chat. But I really just appreciate your time and expertise. Again, if you are just joining us, and as we're signing off, I'd love to remind you all that the Wise Women's Business Center, based in Syracuse, New York, is a phenomenal resource for women entrepreneurs in our area to help you start up, grow, scale, operate, all of those things. Tons of resources to help you there. And then the one resource I'd love to throw a plug in is our one-on-one business coaches, for which I am one. And we have two others, Barb and Lacey. So any parting comments, Alexandra? How can people find you or get in touch with you?
How can you find me? You can find me at whitman.syr.edu and go to the faculty section. I'm listed there. You can probably Google my name, but I have no idea what you're going to find there. But you can definitely find me on the faculty of the Whitman School of Management, and my email will be there too. So happy to, connect via email. But thank you for having me. Saresa is awesome. She was a great coach. So you guys are in good hands. And I guess I would just say, don't be afraid of following your dream, of starting your business. You can do it. If you can dream it, you can do it. And obviously the Wise Center is here to support you. So definitely take advantage of that resource. Because another thing entrepreneurs don't do is ask for help. I know that.
Yes. Great point, Alexandra. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, ladies, for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you again soon.